Well, I was supposed to do this with my sister Alyssa, but she has not joined yet. So I'm gonna start and just start talking. Um, I wanted to do this because I am too ADD to like sit down and write things, and so I thought that if I sat down with somebody and had a conversation, that would be a lot more a much more natural way for me to express ideas, and also get feedback in real time about like what things people actually, what parts I'm skipping over. My other sister is texting me, so maybe that's good. Um, so for example, like there, oh, and the other thing, the other reason was that I actually really enjoy just talking to people, and so it's a kind of content creation that I think that I will actually look forward to making. Whereas like writing is not really a format that I enjoy. Like I don't enjoy the process of writing. It's actually really painful, especially when I'm writing, like typing, and editing. Oh, I hate editing. Writing like longhand, so like writing physically is less bad. In fact, I could potentially like see myself writing that way more. Anyway, and it's taken me a while to get this going. Um, I think mostly because I mean, I procrastinate about everything, and the coronavirus stuff has made it to where like meeting with people. Honestly, that's not even a good excuse. I don't know what my excuse is. I did one that I didn't get audio for, and then the person that I was hoping to get to edit the video wasn't gonna put in the like he wasn't gonna do the things that I actually wanted him to do, and I don't have other like video editing people that I know, and so then you're like paying somebody to do it, and yeah. So so yeah, so that's kind of those are my excuses. I, so more legitimate excuses are I've been going through the divorce, which sucks, and it's so I'm like even more socially isolated because of COVID and the divorce, and um, yeah, and just living in a place where I don't know people. So uh, so that I like aggravates my depressive ADHD procrastination kind of things. So that's why this is video one. Well, technically it's video two, but video one was not very good. Um, so let's see. I'm not sure what to talk about first. Um, the thing that's like easily the heaviest topic right now is the Black Lives Matter stuff. And I'm not sure, honestly, I'm not sure if I have the emotional energy to weigh in on it right this second. So maybe let's save that topic for another day. Um, we might be able to talk about. This is probably not a bad idea. So so I'm in grad school, um, and if you're watching this, you may or may not know that for philosophy. I've done 4 semesters, and I with the divorce last year and a professor who was particularly like unsympathetic. I wound up failing a class, so I have to redo that class, and then I have to do my comprehensive exams. And the comprehensive exams are basically 10 essays on different topics within a like broader topic in philosophy. So topics in philosophy, like major topics, are like epistemology, so like how we know. If you're an IB student that you do a theory of knowledge class, that's epistemology. And then the one that I'm going to focus on for my comprehensive exams is philosophy of mind. And largely because it's kind of a good intersection between my interests and in the classes that I wound up having like the best survey of the literature. And the professor who is kind of responsible for the survey, the literature survey, is Carl Gillett. Um, and he and I ultimately did not wind up seeing eye to eye on a lot of like the answers to the questions in philosophy of mind. Um, he has a very specific view that he likes to plug, and I didn't find it as appealing as I think he likes his students to find it. But he did a very good job of making sure that we were reading through all of you know certain papers, and I'm guessing he had some influence on the questions that were like on the comprehensive exam. So the comprehensive exam questions match his kind of reading very well, and the only thing that might have might have been like similarly appealing would have been like a political philosophy or philosophy of like culture, and but the closest thing to that as a topic in the comprehensive exams is the ethics, and I do actually have quite a bit of ethics, but it's not a focus. Ethics specifically is not an interest of mine. Whereas with philosophy of mind, there's a lot of intersection between philosophy of mind and psychology, philosophy of mind and AI. And AI I find very fascinating. And I don't know, I guess human development. I find them all kind of like similar in that for human development, like when I had kids, you I already had this kind of like philosophical background, and I you know loved sci-fi, and so I had already read a whole bunch of the books that you do about AI and consciousness and things like that. And so I was already kind of thinking at it from this model, from this like perspective of um, like children as like AIs, which sounds weird, but like if you're thinking about like growing a consciousness, about developing something from not not a person, or not sapient, to, to a person that can talk and interact in a fairly normal fashion, then like kids are probably probably the only examples we have of that process. Like that's the only process that we see that happen. And and as a parent, you are in this really unique position, because childhood development happens over, and wherever you want to put the cutoff, like it happens over years, which makes it sound like a slow process, um, but it's really not. Like anybody who's had kids can tell you that it goes by so fast, and there's a reason that that's a common thing for people to say, and that's because kids hit milestones on a, I mean, sometimes daily basis, sometimes it's weeks, but and there's certain big milestones that are months coming or years, but but the little those little success moments are daily, and they're almost random. So when your kid makes, goes from speaking, one word to like two words to like full sentences, like some of those transitions are like overnight. And and if you're not there, it's a lot easier to not be surprised by them, which is almost like a paradox. But like the less frequently you see a kid, the easier it is to accept these transitions in behavior. So like as an uncle or an aunt, you see the kid when they're one, and then you see the kid when they're three, and it's almost like a different person, but you kind of get over that pretty quickly. Whereas as a parent, like you see kind of the same transition, but it's not like, but there's no space. So your brain is just like really like taken aback when this like being that you, because your brain likes things to be like, it likes to be able to predict things. And your brain is really good at doing that. So it's really good at like um, at recognizing patterns, um, for like steady state events. So you can figure out your friends, you can figure out like your dog, and you come to this kind of like steady state, um, uh, like set of circumstances where everybody kind of knows what everybody else is going to do. But a kid is always, it makes it almost impossible for your brain to do that. Um, and the first kid is the most like dramatic. I mean, like I said, your brain is really good at recognizing patterns, and so when you have, especially if when they're in something like a rapid succession, when you have like one kid and then another kid and then another kid, you can kind of like, your brain is like a little bit better about like, with the second kid, you're like, oh yeah, she's gonna do this now, or yeah, of course she's gonna like say, daddy or whatever. But because kids are like, they're not copies of each other, and because having two kids, like they're not, you don't have a second child in isolation, so you don't have like two, um, like you don't have two kids who are getting raised as only children. The second child and the first child are interacting with each other, which throws everything into disarray because, um, so like one of the things that is a big deal in language development is, um, basically talking to the baby, um, and using baby voices and trying to understand what they're saying uh, and just attention. And with your first kid, as a parent, you tend to be really tired the first go around. You tend to be petrified all the time because you have no idea what you're doing, um, and for whatever reason, this I mean this was my and excuse me my and my wife's experience, but it seems to be pretty standard fare with your first kid is like you're just terrified that they're gonna die randomly, like because you don't know. You hear about like stories of like SIDS and babies dying and like and you don't have any reference point for like how resilient or not resilient babies are, and so um, and you wind up doing things that like you don't want to ever tell people that you've done, like when you drop your kid for the first time, like on their head, or not saying I ever, my children were never dropped on their heads, but like you are just so like you are sure that your kids have brain damage and like everything, like it is it's terrifying. And by the second kid you're a little bit more chill, but but the point is like you wind up, I think, not interacting with your first child the way that you interact with subsequent children, just because you're overwhelmed and and it can be really scary. Um, but then also, if so with our second child, so our first child is Sophie, our second child is Charlotte. So with Sophie, um, it's just the two parents interacting with you, and so like if one parent is like, you know, I mean honestly, even if you are outgoing, like, but if one parent is like introverted and isn't super talkative, and it can be hard to be talkative with a baby, especially when you're not uh, like they're not responding. Um, so anyway, you don't talk to them as much as, um, I don't know, as much as would be ideal for their brain development, like for their language development, which is fine. It's not like um, I I'm a first child, and I have great verbal development. Uh, uh, but anyway, but the second child has the first child who will just like jabber at them nonstop. Um, and so, in addition to having the parents doing the same amount of talking, but also probably doing more talking with the oldest child, um, because Sophie's 3 years older than Charlotte, so Sophie was three, and you talk to a 3-year-old a lot because they ask a lot of questions and they are like always they're very very inquisitive, um, and need a lot of like direction. Like, okay, let's put on our shoes now. Okay, like it's like it can be very uh, require a lot of micromanaging. And some with some kids and some parents, even by 3 years old, like the kids can be pretty self-directed. But I think for most parents that's not the case. And like even with parents who are really good at like managing structures and things for small children, um, it's still way more work than it is when they're older, and you can just tell them, hey, uh, get ready, we're going in 5 minutes. And then um, like if it's done or not done, it's not because they didn't know how to do the thing that you were asking them to do or didn't understand what you were asking them to do. It was just that they didn't feel like it. um, so anyway, so all that to say that uh, the brain development of oldest children, of like different children, even within the same family with the same parents. And honestly, I think even if Sophie, Charlotte, and Annie were all clones, like if they were genetic clones that had been spaced three years out, I think you would still wind up with pretty substantial behavioral differences and developmental differences. Not necessarily better or worse, but fitting into different roles in the families, in like in our family, but you could do that with a given family, and I think you would wind up with similar results. So I'm not a birth order like I don't know, fatalist. Like I don't think that like I think that there are probably patterns, but I think that it's probably more like sets of patterns than than a specific pattern. So so like I would guess that there are different roles in the family that wind up being filled by children, um, and um, and that those tend to be filled more or less by children of like certain ages, and it may be that the oldest child fills that role best, but it also may be that the oldest child doesn't have, has no desire to fill that role, and um, and so doesn't really like fit that mold. And then I think that also it's not just like there's one role. Um, there's a bunch of like as the family has different contexts, you have different roles. So like for traveling, you have different roles, and for like going to school or getting home from school or cooking dinner, and um, so even if you had like a type, or like a pattern, you might pick and choose. Um, so from that standpoint, I think that birth order is probably overly specific. Like I'm talking about like the birth order book kind of stuff. I think that the patterns are overly specific, and probably like they give too much detail, and they're uh, overly rigid. So it's like this is oldest child, and um, I haven't. I'd be interested to read like what some of the scholarly research on birth order is, um, in the last 20 years to figure out like if they're assuming there is some. I don't know. Um, and find out, yeah, what the variance in like in to certain patterns is, and whether there's, anything at all. And I think there's some, like I said, in the language development, I think is like a good example where you just have the second child in some ways paradoxically gets more attention, and more of the kind of attention that's good for language development, from being the second child than being the oldest child. Even though, like, people talk about the oldest children getting, like dedicated mom and dad attention, I think a lot of times the kind of attention that the oldest children get in, the first however many years is not linguistic attention. Um, so and it's offset somewhat by being you only have two adults in the house. Um, let's see. So I mentioned that, like, I think that early childhood development and AI and, psychology, especially um, like the neuroscience, and I forgot what's the other one. It's like cognitive science. Anyway, but basically looking at, um, like neuroscientists who are looking at, brain structures and the way that brains actually function. Um, because okay, so to bring it back to AI, so I don't know, maybe 30 years ago, you started having, gosh, it's actually probably more than 30 years ago now. So let's say 40 years ago, sometime in the 80s, you had, neural networks become, kind of become a thing on people's radars, and in the 90s, there was some experimentation with, like, hardware-based neural networks, um, that were very, very simple. I actually remember, in the French school, reading about some of them, and, the acronym was BEAM, BEAM, and I don't remember I don't remember what it stood for, but it was very simple, using like transistors, as neurons. Um, but but since then, the I think the well, not I think. Since then, neural networks have become much, much more sophisticated. Um, and to give you a breakdown, if you're not familiar with what they are, so the idea was that, the way brains work is that it's not like a computer where you have a CPU and then a hard drive and then memory. They're all kind of jumbled together and, into what are called neurons. And instead of having, uh, like, all of the processing power done there, all of the, like, memory in this storage area, and all of the, so short-term memory in the RAM, you kind of have this network of these neurons, and a just insanely complicated network of neurons that basically functions as all three. And so the idea was to say, okay, well, what would happen if we tried to copy that, kind of copy that in principle, because copying it in reality would be much, much more complicated. And to give you an idea why, so, really simple neurons like that insects have, are, I don't know, maybe dozens of connections, but uh, but with, like, what they call a pyramid style neuron. So basically, the, like, high functioning neurons that humans have in our brains, you're talking thousands and thousands of connections for just one neuron. And so even just modeling the traffic that from all of the inputs and outputs to that one neuron is a very, very large undertaking. So like you have entire like rooms of computers dedicated to modeling a single neuron. And I don't know where the horsepower is right now in terms of like how many neurons we can actually model, like fully model. But at the time, that was not possible. And so they said, okay, we'll do a simplified version, but where you have inputs and outputs, but the neuron kind of changes its state based on what the inputs and outputs are, and we'll network them and have this kind of like big network of neurons, and it'll kind of like distill down into this action. So, and there's different styles of neural network, and this is a point where it would be nice to have like I should probably have a diagram, but yeah, but the general idea is that instead of having one computer, like neural networks have been almost entirely run on computers. Like they're run on computers instead of being the computers. But instead of having a program that says if this then this, if this then this, if this then this, in kind of like this traditional algorithm style, you have just this wave of outputs, and that will kind of coalesce into a behavior. And the idea is that instead of programming the outcome that you want, you train the neural network, and so you put it in the scenario a whole bunch of times, and help it basically remember the times that it's successful. And so you give it like failure conditions and success conditions and let it run the scenario a whole bunch of times, and basically gradually get better. And this is kind of where we are right now, with it, at least in the kind of like publicly available deep learning. Is you basically take this huge data set of scenarios. You get your very, very big deep learning neural network, and you have it run through the scenario a whole bunch of times and fail most of those times, and gradually like learn what to do, what you actually want it to do. And this is again, so to come back to like childhood development, this is actually very, very similar to the way that babies learn. And so like and again, this is the kind of thing that I think it's a lot harder to see the connection if you haven't gone through the process of like having a baby, because when you see somebody else's baby, you just see them doing this, like, playing with their hands or whatever, but you don't see the progression. So babies they put their hands in their mouths and suck at like picking up objects, but and they'll do it for hours. But the thing is, like, they're learning. Like, it's very much like a Jurassic Park kind of like clever girl. Like they get better through failure, and they fail so much with everything, like, trying to like get food to their mouths, like trying to walk, trying to crawl, trying to like touch their face, trying to like put their hands in their mouths, like when they first start they can like do this, and then like eventually they get to doing more complex behaviors. And so as a model for for developing AI, it winds up being useful, I think, in some ways to look at kind of what human brains are doing. And I mean, part of the problem is that you watching the human, like watching a baby's external behavior, doesn't tell you nearly as much as it would be convenient to know about what's going on in the brain itself while all of that is happening. Because, and I think so you'll hear some people say that that babies are like not intelligent. They'll say, "Well, my dog is as smart as a 2-year-old." That's not true at all. The the because so a mark of one of the biggest markers of intelligence is the capacity for learning, in my opinion. So so your dog, let's say you have a really really smart dog. That dog can learn. With years and years and years of active disciplined instruction, that dog can learn 300 words. Your baby, with no effort, will learn thousands of words, thousands of words, like maybe in their first year. And they can't speak, but they can recognize and they understand. I would say at least 1,000 words, and I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's a lot. And so the average adult vocabulary is something like 10,000 words, or maybe it's more than that. But that's about how many. Oh, that might be how much children hear in the home. That's kind of that's like a good median number. But still, so you're talking 10,000 words. You want your child to have tens of thousands of words worth of vocabulary, and but your dog will top out at a vocabulary of 100 words, and then they also in stringing together words and concepts. Your dog can I don't know if you've seen the little button pads, where the dog pushes a button and it says outside or food or pet or different things that the dog wants. And usually the dog can do one. It can say outside. I think some dogs can do two, so they can do outside now or want food or something like that. But babies can string together. But basically, the complexity of the thought goes up exponentially to a point, with the number of words that you're stringing together. So you kind of think of a run-on sentence. You're trying to cram too much complexity into a single sentence, and humans can. The sky is kind of the limit. You're talking orders, probably 3 or 4 orders of magnitude more complex, and children are able to achieve that cognitively very 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 young, even for a lot of times before they're able to say it, or before they're able to get the grammar down. And then so my child, and she's I would say that my children are intelligent, and gifted, if you want to put it that way, but they're not outside they're not outside the bounds of normal. They're not prodigies, in the sense of they're not reading at 2 years old and building, I don't know, building rocket ships in their diapers. they're they're like within the bounds of normal development. Um, but my 2-year-old is speaking full sentences at 2, and again, that's not like unusual. And so I have a video of her where she's like telling this story. She's got this whole like pretend where she's taking me through and pretending to like put her baby to bed. And she's got this whole story of what's going on. So she has this entire like pretend environment going on in her head at age 2. And and again, like, I mean, some parents really like to think that their kids are like, God's gift to, whatever. And and there's a little bit of that in me, but um, but that, uh, but my kids are not unusual. That's like standard 2-year-old behavior. Um, and so, and again, like, we didn't, I didn't show her how to do that. Like, I didn't like give her the scenario, like this, and I didn't even like tell her that I wanted to play dolls. She took me to play dolls. Um, and I don't know, I was doing like, I didn't, it's not that I like was like, oh, cool, let's play dolls. It was like, I don't want to do this. I want to do something else. But she was like insistent. And so I was like, okay, this is cute. Um, so I guess my point is that there's a lot going on under the hood, so to speak. The brain is working at, like, it is doing so much learning. Um, so it's that children are just as intelligent, and in some ways more. Like, the brain is more plastic, and whether that equates to intelligence, I think, is kind of up for debate. And you know whether you have to have certain thresholds. But the point is, in terms of in terms of learning, um, and and in terms of what the brain is doing, in terms of like how much activity there is and what kind of activity. Um, the first, well, it starts before. I don't actually know when it starts exactly in terms of development, but um, it's definitely, let's say, second trimester. So second trimester of pregnancy, you start to get like some pretty heavy brain development. And third trimester is really almost more like baby stage than fetus. Like, it's more qualitatively similar to a baby than to a fetus. Um, and yes, that has implications for abortion. um, but and just so we're clear, I do not think that third trimester abortions are okay, barring like very extreme circumstances. So, like, threat to the mother if the child will not be viable, like some severe, like like severe, like far beyond like Downs, but like severe cognitive deficiencies, um, like those kinds of things. But like third trimester should abortion should not be like, let's just go get it done kind of thing. You're at that point, your body is not your own. Um, so I think a third trimester fetus has more rights than a second trimester fetus is what I'm saying. Um, that being said, that's not the purpose of this discussion. So you have this brain development that goes on. Let's say start at the third trimester for that kind of development, even though I think it actually starts sooner. Um, so, uh, so the brain is basically like wiring itself, and but as far as I know, we don't have very good data at all on how it is constructing itself. In terms of like, well, I mean, first of all, because we don't really have a very good map of the brain to begin with. It's getting a lot better, but I think there's resolution issues with because so basically like MRIs, if I'm remembering correctly, maps areas of activation based on the amount of blood flowing to that area. So when you do an MRI and you can like the fMRI, and you see like little brain like areas of the brain light up, what that actually is the blood going to that area of the brain, which is like a good analog for activation in terms of like large areas of the brain. It has a couple of problems. So the first problem is it's a resolution issue because like if you remember me saying like you have like neurons that have like thousands of connections. You don't know which of those connections is actually being activated. You know that you know that you know X number like X percentage of neurons in this area of the brain are being activated, but you don't know which neurons specifically are being activated, and you don't know like which synapses are being activated, and and so like mapping the network is still difficult. You can't map it from an fMRI, and so as far as I know, the best that we're doing right now is just kind of guessing, and trying to take the fMRI data and model it computationally. So remember I was telling you like we were modeling like a single neuron in like in the computer. So I think it's gotten better, and I don't know how many that we can model fully. It might be, and I also don't know. So whenever you have a model, there are certain things that get left out of the model, and you basically try and leave out things that aren't going to affect it. That'll like give you like results that are analogous to that are the same that you'll see in the real world, and so but that will simplify your model to make it like you able to run it. And I don't know what the assumptions are that they use, and to what degree the models that they are running are simplified. And so like I don't know how much fidelity there is. But assuming they're reasonably like they've got reasonably good fidelity, I think we're up to like simulating a rat brain, which is actually a big deal. But let's see, I'm trying to remember like you're probably talking like an order of magnitude difference in complexity still between a rat brain and a human brain, at least. And that means 10 times as much. So a human brain is 10 times as complicated as a rat brain. I think is, don't quote me on that. Like, look it up on Wikipedia and tell me if I'm wrong. But the point is that our fMRI has limitations in resolution, and then the other limitation is that you can't attach an fMRI to a baby and just let it grow up with an fMRI attached to its head. That is first of all not even possible. That maybe I shouldn't. That shouldn't have been the first one. First of all, that would be very unethical. Um, but like you I don't think you could even run like even current fMRIs. I don't think you could run. Uh, you couldn't run them 24/7 even if you wanted to. Um, but then like even if you could, let's say we had some sort of magic fMRI that you could run 24/7, and then you need to make it portable. Like you basically need a way to have an fMRI that is like a hat that you can stick on a kid that will grow with them, and uh, and give you really good resolution on like which synapses are firing. And there might actually like be physical, so not just like technological limitations, but like there are like like so we it's like it's not that we don't have like technology good enough, it's that we will never have technology good enough to actually see that closely. So like one of the limitations is like at least for adults, your skull is a certain thickness, and there's basically signal degradation between your brain and like the top of your head. So like let's say you shave your head and you like stick electrodes all over your head, or you have an fMRI. Um, Basically the amount of uh, like fuzz that goes between um, that happens between your brain, like your brain actually making the signal, or the synapse, let's say, making the signal, and exiting, you know, exiting out the top of your head, is such that it's not possible to see. Uh, it's not possible to see what the synapse did. Um, and I guess the analogy would be like you. So let's say you're trying to see what's happening inside a house, and it's like in a certain wavelength of light. Um, let's say blue light. Well, blue light passes through glass just fine, and then like I don't know, let's say dirty glass, it passes through kind of, and then like a wall, it doesn't pass through at all. And so we have kind of like this like dirty glass, and uh, like it's not enough to like we're already like we're barely getting enough to see like big changes, and so the so we but we'll never get enough to see like blue changes. Let's say what's another anyway. um so I wonder if I should talk about how this relates to philosophy of mind, because I feel like I've done a lot of like AI um, and like child development, um, but I haven't talked about philosophy of mind at all. So I mean, I think one of the one of the relations is you've been experiencing, and that is like making the connections that I've been talking about are really not they're not made by computer scientists uh, or like early childhood development people very often. Um, so, and I don't. I don't know what the cause of this is, but but something that's just kind of like true in in academia is that you kind of stay in your lane. Like, so if you are an early childhood development researcher, you stick to early childhood development and you don't talk about AI. And if you are a AI researcher, you talk about AI and you don't talk about early childhood development. Like, you don't read those guys, you don't comment on them. Um, and and in philosophy, there's a lot more leeway to engage with different disciplines. And I think especially right now, because there's been such a focus on specialization for so long in academia, I think that there's been a lot of there's been a lot of gaps and a lot of like things that should have overlapped or converged, and but because of this like stay in your lane thing, which like there are reasons for that, but because of that, you have people who are like working on the same problem, but the piece of the puzzle that this person needs is over here, and the piece of the puzzle that this person needs is over here, and they never get to like, because they're never talking to each other, they never get the piece of the puzzle that they need. And so philosophy of mind, well, philosophy in general, is, I think, a better place than a lot of other places um, to explore the connections there, that that other people just don't have the freedom to. And so, and I think it also gives you, hopefully, it gives you tools to learn and engage in a rigorous way with disciplines that you're not an expert in. Because what you don't want to have happen is, I call it doctor syndrome, but which is not my term, but I don't remember whose it is, and Googling it doesn't come up with anything. So, but the idea is, a doctor will be an expert in their field, but being an expert in your field doesn't make you an expert in other fields, but it does sometimes give you the confidence to talk about other fields as if you're an expert. And this is not at all like exclusive to like medical doctors. There are some physicists, Neil deGrasse Tyson, who do this as well. They talk about philosophy, or ethics, or politics, and they are experts in like physics or medicine or surgery, but they're not experts in history and other things, and will wind up saying things that are just, they're not just wrong, they're like dangerously wrong. Like, they're like very, very, very like they're harmful misconceptions that get promoted. And so as your philosopher who's potentially doing this cross-pollinating, you don't want to be that guy. So you don't want to like misinterpret the findings in neuroscience, and also misinterpret the findings in like AI, and then come up with this like really like bad interpretation, this bad conclusion based on bad like readings of both disciplines. And in theory, philosophy, like the training in philosophy, sets you up to be able to do that better than I think some other disciplines do. But really, it's like, it's not a given by any stretch. So really, I think the biggest thing is that you just sometimes have the freedom to do that, because as long as you're publishing something and people are reading it, then they don't really care if it, they don't, nobody cares if it benefits humanity or if it makes anybody money, like, because there is no money to be made, like. Whereas like in engineering, like, if you're raking in, if your research is raking in money, that is better than not, like, doing research that's not raking in money. Uh, and so the research that rakes in money gets prioritized over the stuff that doesn't. And so there's no funding if you want to be like somebody who's doing one of these more, I don't know, less conventional areas of research. Um, so that's like the conceptual reason. Practically speaking, philosophy of mind, especially in the last like 100 years, has actually had some like pretty big impacts on the directions for that the computer science research has taken. And so probably the biggest, easiest example is uh, AI research. So in the 70s, there was this push for what they called strong AI, and you have all of these movies about like uh, what is it? I can't do that, Dave. Like 2001: A Space Odyssey kind of stuff, where AIs wind up being very malevolent, and um, but the AI researchers are like, AI is coming. It's almost here. It's going to be here soon. It's and you started having these philosophers start to push back and say, what you're talking about building is not consciousness. We're not sure what consciousness is, but we know that it's not that. And there's a famous example. Well, there's a couple of famous papers that were written, but one of the famous examples was called the Chinese room, and basically the idea is if you stick a guy into a room with like a book of all the Chinese characters and basically like a set of rules for like, hey, if you get this set of characters, you give out this card. Um, and and then like so you have people feeding him Chinese, like these little like Chinese phrases through the thing, and outputting the other kinds of like the correct phrases. And and the guy was like, well, so let's say that this thing gets to be indistinguishable from a native speaker. And the idea is like, this is kind of like a Turing test type thing. So the guy gets indistinguishable from a native speaker by inputting and outputting these cards um, based on a set of rules. Uh, like, does it stand to reason that this guy then knows Chinese? And the answer is to that question is no. And and then there's objections to whether like, oh well, does the room know Chinese? But uh, but the broader point I think that was made by a lot of philosophers of mind was, look, you don't actually know what it is you're like. You don't have a success condition that is like well defined. Like you don't know what it is to be conscious. So there's no way for you to achieve it because you don't know what it is. Like, if you're trying to construct something, it's like trying to construct an airplane when you don't really understand why things stay in the air and why some things like fall. Like, so you don't really even understand like that you need wings, or like lift or any of those things. And I mean, to continue the analogy, like, and you actually had some of that in like early flight attempts. I mean, I think famously, like, uh, Leonardo da Vinci has this like has several flying machine um, like sketches of these very elaborate flying machines, none of which will work for various reasons that mostly revolve around not understanding basic principles of like why things fly. And so it took, let's see, so Da Vinci was like what, 1300s, 1400s? I mean, almost a half a millennium. Like, so if you're talking like 1800s, uh, before anybody understood the principles well enough to get anything to fly. Although, debatably, um, I think it would be interesting because kites arguably are flying machines that predate really any like understanding of physics. Um, but actually, like if you look at kite designs, um, it's actually really it's actually really interesting to see like 1800s kite designs, as people are kind of like trying to hone in on what it is about the kite that makes the kite fly and makes the kite stable and makes the kite this and that and the other. Anyway, so the Chinese room, there were several. It wasn't just that one, but there were several other philosophers of mind who were like, "Look, you keep using that word, but I don't think you know what it means." And so they're like, "You're not going to be able to do this with what you are like claiming with the tools you have. Like, you're missing some pretty major. You have some really big conceptual gaps that you're going to need to fill before you're going to be able to do this." And there were a couple of researchers who actually quit and started working on the conceptual gaps, instead of doing AI, and basically waiting for everything else to catch up. And one of those researchers was the guy who was Larry Page and Sergey Brin's advisor. So he was the guy that taught, like, was their PhD. Like, they were working on his search engine stuff before they founded Google, before they wrote their own search engine. But that was his research. He stopped researching AI and started researching search engines, and and that's you know that was, let's see. So I think he stopped either in the late 70s or early 80s, and then Google was founded in like 93, I think. So like their PhD candidates in the early 90s. So it took him like 10 years to like really mature even that research. And then and Google is kind of like just now maturing its like deep learning networks. And that's kind of where we are. So, but that's almost 30 years later. You are starting to get computers that can do things that humans take for granted, like object recognition, which, again, like, we take that for granted, like being able to recognize faces or say, like, look at the world around us and notice some object and say that object is a cup. and then go and like pick that cup up and bring it to our lips and say, that cup has water in it, I'm going to drink it. Um, and computers are just now getting to the point where they can do some of those things independent, like individually. So like they can recognize something's a cup. They can recognize something's a cup that has water in it. Maybe they can. Sometimes they can like pick something up, but there's some pretty there's still some like very very large gaps, but it is very much an interesting topic. It's very much an active topic, and I think it's a topic that I think it's a topic that I could make contributions to that would be useful to the discipline. Um, so, and I'm at an hour. I'm not sure if I should go longer or save this for another thing, but I'll keep going because fuck it. Um, so one area that I think is, um, like I said, a um, an area that I could make contributions to is is in the area of um, like I don't know, ethical formation. Okay, so let's come back to like early childhood development. So you have most humans have some sense of like right and wrong, and no matter like they don't all have the same sense of right and wrong, mind you, but they do have some sense of like this is okay to do, this is not okay to do, and for most people that is largely internal, and and the extent to which it's not internal, it's social. So to give an example, like murder is wrong. I may have like so first of all, I probably don't have like a desire to murder people very often. Like it's not like I don't go around like the minute somebody like does something I don't like, my first instinct is not to like, oh, they did something I don't like, I should murder them, like I should kill them. Um, and you don't think of that as being like that's not like an inherent like an inherent moral thing. Um, but it is like it is. I mean, not murdering people is like a pretty basic. Uh, it's like a basic moral expectation. Like if we had an AI, we would want it to like not murder us, which I mean is like you know the subject of so many like AI whatever like um, like all the movies about AI are about AIs like losing their shit and murdering everybody. Um, so that's our basic fear is to get murdered, and um, so it's like very much a moral thing. It's like the most basic moral principle: don't murder people. And so it kind of makes sense that for most people, like that's not even like something that we want to do ever or if or very often. For some of us who I guess live more frustrating lives. Um, but so so you have this like in like you don't have the desire, and then when you do have the desire, let's say let's say hypothetically you were like, fuck that guy, like, he did something really heinous, and I want to murder him, but I'm not going to, um, because murder is wrong, or because it like feels wrong to, you know, like you have this impulse to like, I want to kill that guy, but you're like, oh no, I'm not gonna kill him because that would be crazy. That would make me a murderer, and that would be bad. Um, Not that I. This isn't a commentary on anybody's inner monologue. Please don't come after me. Um, but the idea is like you have this like internal kind of like stop, like don't do that kind of thing. But then let's say you're a bad person, and you would murder people if you could get away with it, but you don't think you can get away with it, and so you're like, or like, or like, you know, you would murder people, but then your mom would like hate you, like, it would make your family sad, like, they would be disappointed in you. Which, I mean, maybe I should use a different example that's like less extreme, because these are all reasons that you like might have not to do things. But I think because it's such an extreme example, maybe it's not. Let's see, what's something that's wrong that's maybe more relatable. Like, I feel like stealing money, or like cheating on your this is, I think, maybe this is maybe more common, maybe more relatable, but like cheating on your significant other, very common. um Not something I ever did, but it's something that, like, even if you never do it, there are people who have like at least fleeting impulses. Like, if you're in a monogamous relationship and you have an impulse to, you're like sexually attracted to somebody else, or emotionally you form this emotional connection with somebody else. And I mean, even so, arguably part of being a good monogamous partner is managing situations that could potentially lead to like emotional bonds forming, or like, you know, sexually, I don't know, sexually charged situations. So like, if you are a married man, then like, I don't know, frequenting places that have lots of prostitutes, or, I don't know, going to drunken parties without your spouse, where nobody knows your spouse, like where there are opportunities for like cheating to happen. Or I think more realistically, like the way I think a lot of them form is you have emotional bonds that form with people who are not your spouse, but are the same, uh, but you are sexually attracted to. So like, if you're a straight guy, you form some sort of like close emotional bond with a woman who is, um, you know, sexually appealing. Um, so a lot of times it's somebody you work with. Um, and anyway, so but the idea is, your first impulses are like, I think, oh, I'm not going to do this because it's wrong. I'm not going to do this because, like, what would people think? And then, well, I'm not going to do this, maybe because it's illegal. Um, but like, there's internal pressures, and then there's like external pressures. is the idea. So the question is, for an AI researcher, is how well, I mean, even for early childhood development, and I think there's actually there's a fair bit of research on this broadly, but I don't think it's specific enough yet, um, because the human brain is so flippin' complicated. Um, which, I mean, even flippin' complicated is like the understatement of the century. It is almost certainly the most complex thing humanity has ever studied. Um, like I and well, I won't talk about like like nuclear fusion because I don't know anything about it. Um, but it's that kind of level of sophistication. It's a very very hard problem. Um, and like early childhood development and psychologists are coming at moral development that's like trying to drink the ocean through a straw. Like, you have a um, very limited access to like what the brain is doing during development. You have fairly limited access to exactly what's going on in the home, parenting wise. Um, you have, I mean, really, and this is actually something that I would argue has been a huge bottleneck, is that, and I see this all the time with like, well, I shouldn't. I'm throwing these guys under the bus because these people under the bus because I think they're kind of like they're like queen of the hill, so to speak, right now in I guess in psychology, but like intersectional feminists. It drives me crazy because they'll make these statements about gender identity, um, that are very, very culture bound. And so there was some girl posting on TikTok, which forgive me, but about like toxic masculinity, and and I was like, and I'm trying to think of what the exact traits were. But it was basically they were traits that were masculine traits, not just, oh, she said in Western, that was the thing that just really threw me, was she's like, hey, these are toxic masculine traits in Western cultures, and I was like, you say Western cultures as if they're not traits in non-Western cultures, as if like this is an exclusively Western issue, and I think, according to her, and again, TikTok is like the worst place for the worst forum for this kind of stuff. But her her defense was, well, we only have done the research for Western cultures, and so we don't know about other cultures. And I was like, well, that's partially true, but it's mainly not true, because we actually do have really good evidence to suggest that non-Western cultures see these traits as masculine as well. And you are not a man, if you don't live up to these ideals. So I think one of them was like, crying, uh, like, like showing weakness. That was one that just like, oh my gosh, it threw me so much. It was like displaying, displaying, crying was one of them, and like displays of weakness. Uh, there were a couple of others, but I was like, I'm sorry. Have you ever like seen Japanese culture? Like, how many Japanese men do you see like displaying like any emotion in public? Like, especially like crying. Like, there are some cultures where there are very specific times that it's okay for a man to cry. Like at like in like as far as I understand, in Semitic cultures, it's okay for a man to cry, um, like at a funeral. So at a funeral of somebody who they were close to, that's okay. It's okay if a man's crying there. Um, but like, yeah, can you just imagine like um, like like some like Arab prince like saying, "Oh, he hurt my feelings," and he's like bawling, like he would be like, "Oh my gosh." Um, so I'm like, look, these traits, and you can make the argument that these are still toxic traits. Okay, so I'm not saying that they're necessarily wrong, but I am saying that I think you need to if you're advocating for changing those and you're going to label them toxic, you need to be damn sure that they're toxic. If it's the kind of thing that has been around, that's not just Western, that it's like omnipresent, or near omnipresent in human cultures. If that's the case, then it might be a lot harder to change than you think, and what might wind up happening is you get guys who fake the behaviors that are desired, instead of like, so they basically pretend to cry but they're not actually crying, or whatever, they're doing whatever it is that they're supposed to do but they don't. They haven't internalized the behavior and will never internalize the behavior, and it just becomes a form of hypocrisy, which I think is honestly already there, with like, you see men who identify as feminists, and how how many of them just as like have been guilty of like similarly heinous like things in the Me Too movement. So, um, which isn't to excuse the behavior, but the so the argument is that, oh well, they just need to, like, I don't know, be better trained or something. If they knew, like, if they knew what it was to, not do these things, then they would not do these things. And it seems like it's there's something else going on. And I don't really want to get into that, but the point is that, when you're doing AI, you need a way to program, um, a sense of morality, um, or to train. You need a way to train morality, and that is a tall order because a, we have trouble doing it. We have trouble training humans in morality, um, as the like previous example, I think, kind of illustrates, and b, because like the whole idea, the whole kind of reasoning behind having these AI systems is not for them to be, kids' toys, although that will probably be an application as well. But um, but because they're going to be like expensive. What was the movie that I just saw that was like did a really good job of this? Oh no, it wasn't the movie. It was Horizon Zero Dawn. Actually, I loved the game in part because I felt like their characterization of AI was actually very, very, very good, very appropriate. Um, so in the game, basically, humanity fucks up, and as one guy specifically who's making defense drones. um, basically steps over the line with regards to AI and is manufacturing drones with AI that is basically too intelligent. That also has like the ability to consume organic matter as fuel. So it basically like builds its own. It builds its own gasoline on the fly. So it'll like chop down trees and like suck them in and convert that to, I don't know, gas. So of course the AI goes rogue and just starts like hoovering the whole planet, and they figure out they're not going to be able to beat it, and so what they do is they build a better AI to shut down the first AI, but it's going to take, I don't know, like 100 years for the second AI to get going. And so by that time everybody's going to be dead. And so the game takes place after everything has happened. So like after all the people are dead and there's like new people, kind of like picking up the pieces, and there's uh, anyway. So but in kind of in the process you meet a bunch of like kind of like minor AIs that were built to do things like manage very complex systems. So there's one AI that's in one of the expansions that you meet who manages a geothermal plant that's built on top of this volcano that's supposed to explode, and so her job is to basically vent enough thermal energy out of different places to keep the volcano dormant indefinitely. And um, so it's very like it's one of these jobs that's like very complex, would take a lot of like constant attention. Um, but it's a like very expensive it's a very expensive project. So the idea is, and if she like fucks up, like not just like not if she goes rogue. If she fucks up, like l- lots and lots and lots of people die. Um, and uh, so the idea is uh, you need to have an AI that wants to do the right thing. Not just it's not enough to have like an amoral AI that just doesn't care. Like let's say you had an AI that just didn't care if humanity lived or died, like, and um, they weren't like malicious, and they weren't like going out of their way to like hurt humanity or being like intentionally like like let's say you have an AI that's like, yeah, I'll help if it's easy, but like don't ask me to like don't ask me to like do anything hard to save your butts. Like like it just doesn't it just doesn't actually give a shit. And so like and humanity gets in trouble, and the AI's like, well, like I mean like I could save you, but that would be hard. Like so like so you want, yeah, like, but so in like a human sense, like, so let's say your friend is like about to die, and you're like, oh yeah, I could save you, but like I would it would involve me crashing my car, and that sounds, you know, that sounds hard. That sounds like a lot of work. uh, I don't know, maybe I mean I guess the I think one of the things that um, honestly, again, I think we're probably our understanding of morality and at least how humans process morality is probably more accurate. So not morality as like this ethereal discipline, but how humans actually engage with morality, like how we understand it, how it actually like influences our behavior. So like how different moral systems um, is I don't think very well understood, and so if coming back to the idea of like AI initially, like if you don't understand a process, it's going to be very hard to replicate, because you don't know what success looks like, and so I think I'm in a good position, in terms of how and where I was raised. So because I grew up overseas, and kind of had to navigate several different like several ethical systems that had pretty major differences, like there were some pretty major differences in like fundamental assumptions about which things are right, and like I hope that I will be able to maybe not solve the problem, but at least shine a light on where the research needs to go next. So say, look, this is you've got all of these different cultures, and they have all of these different things. Like these are the relevant differences in their moral systems, and so if you're looking at moral formation, you need to look here. This is how this is being done with humans, and this is like what you get. This is the finished product. Like here's what a well formed moral compass is in this culture, and here's what a like badly formed moral person is in this culture. Because one of the things is like I was saying, like people come out and you still have like bad people, and I use the like quotes because like what's bad in one society, like bad according to that society. So you have people who are social deviants according to that society, not necessarily like bad in some ultimate moral sense, and not because I don't believe in like moral truth, but because I think moral formation happens in the context of the society that you're raised in, and so you're going to be like good or bad according to that society. Um, but anyway, but even people who are raised in this society still come out and do things that society is like that's bad. Um, and so the question is, why? and um, and I guess what do you do about it, in the context of like AI? Um, and I mean there's some like I think there's like I think there are some good guesses as to like what makes somebody bad, um, or like less altruistic, but I don't know that it's necessarily easy to replicate the desired outcome, or even have a good idea of what exactly the desired outcome is. Like I think a specific desired outcome is harder to, like, the more specific you get with your desired outcome, the harder it is to like to have something that you can actually implement, and the more trade-offs that you're going to have. So that might actually be the real answer, is that human behavior has trade-offs, and moral behavior also has trade-offs, and and so you can't, like, making an AI, like a moral AI, is going to have trade-offs as well, and actually you're already kind of seeing this, like, in a very, very, very simple, um, like, very, very simple, sense with self-driving cars, where the idea is, so let's say the self-driving car runs into a trolley problem scenario where it can either, like, let's say it can run over a child or crash the car into, a telephone pole and kill everybody in the car. And let's say those are the options that, so you have your self-driving car, the AI that's driving the car has a choice to run over a kid, or, like, kill a kid, or crash into a telephone pole. And what is your self-driving car supposed to prioritize? Is it supposed to prioritize the lives of the people inside, over people outside, or is it supposed to prioritize the life of a child over the life of, four adults, let's say? And there's not both outcomes are bad in that situation, but even in situations where there aren't, like, where neither outcome is bad, but there aren't, there can be moral disagreement, among humans. It becomes hard to, like, say, oh, well, we need to make AI do this or to do that, but those kinds of situations are moral situations, and yeah, it's there may not be, like, right answers to those questions. Anyway, I'm at an hour and 45 minutes, and I think I'm done for today. So if you have watched this, then thanks for watching. Thanks for paying attention. And if not, then I don't know. I'm not actually talking to you.